in the Rockies of Western Canada, the remains of a shipwreck lies on the underwater slope of a beautiful mountain lake.
Jim, we're gonna tow side scan behind these guys next time.
This is hard bailing off of a horse into the water.
Join the Sea Hunters as they dive to investigate the sunken remains of a spectacular top-secret World War II project that was at one time considered to be as important to the war effort as the development of the atomic bomb. With over 100 million books in print, Clive Cussler is the Grand Master of shipwreck tales and adventure. Director of the Vancouver Maritime Museum, James Delgado is one of the world's foremost marine archaeologists. Introduced to diving at an early age, Warren Fletcher is a professional diver and underwater cameraman capturing images around the globe. Leading the Econova dive team, Mike Fletcher has coordinated shipwreck searches all over the world. Together, they explore the planet's last frontier in search of true adventures with famous shipwrecks. They are the Sea Hunters. Far out in the middle of the North Atlantic, there is a dark stretch of foreboding water, once known as the Black Pit. It's a deep section of the ocean that holds the remains of thousands of sailors and their ships, sent to the bottom by German U-boats during World War II. It was a favorite lair for the prowling wolf pack, for the simple reason that they could prey on Allied shipping without serious risk of attack from the sky. The Black Pit was too far from land to be effectively patrolled by shore-based aircraft. They were desperate times that called for desperate measures. The Allied ships needed protection from the air. So an idea was put forth to design a giant ship beyond the scope of anything ever built. A ship twice the length of today's largest aircraft carriers. Essentially, floating islands stationed over the Black Pit. These ships would carry a fleet of surveillance and attack aircraft with their own fuel storage and maintenance support. It was a colossal concept, wrought with engineering challenges, an unconventional idea that originated from an unconventional mind, a person of vision and tremendous brainpower. British Combined Operations and the Prime Minister himself, Winston Churchill, were backing just such a visionary. Soon, a most secret project to build a prototype of his design was underway. But there was a problem.
Hello, I'm Clive Cussler. The man with the vision, Geoffrey Pike, seemed a little too unconventional. He didn't always comb his hair, had an odd habit of not wearing socks, and often looked like he needed a bath. Still more troubling, he planned to build his giant ship out of ice. Actually, he calculated that ice alone wasn't strong enough, so wood pulp would be added into the mix. And where would this frozen monstrosity be built? Canada, of course. Who knew more about wood pulp and ice than our friends from the frozen north, the Canadians? I know the whole thing seems too weird to be true, but believe me, it really happened. In fact, the British once considered this to be one of their most promising secret projects of the war. Now join us on the most bizarre Sea Hunters adventure ever, into the wilds of Canada, to dive the remains of Habakkuk, ship of ice.
When my son Warren and I were first asked to be part of an expedition to fly high into the Rocky Mountains and dive on a ship made of ice that sank in World War II, I thought in the beginning they must be crazy. It begged the obvious. Wouldn't it have melted by now? And the last time I checked, ice disappears when it melts in water. But our team of underwater archaeologists, Jim Delgado and Susan Langley, insist there really is, or at least was, a Habakkuk, made of ice and other frozen materials that have indeed melted. The expedition is a great chance to experience the vastness and the rugged wildness of the Rocky Mountains. Once into the interior of the range, we rent vans and drive into Jasper National Park. During the war, this was a very wild and private place, especially in the winter of '43 when Habakkuk was being built here on the shores of beautiful Lake Patricia. Beyond those same shores is the final resting place of Habakkuk. Once inside the park, we encountered our first obstacle. How are we going to transport all of our dive and film gear into a remote lake inside a national park where gas motors aren't allowed? We do what any self-respecting Westerner would do. It really isn't all that far to ride into the dive site, but the horses really let us get into the spirit of the place. Wow, Warren, there's the lake. Look at it. The wreck should be right off the beach. Believe it or not, the idea of Habakkuk is beginning to grow on me. Not so much the ice idea, but I am buying into the concept of building ships out of unconventional materials. Jim Warren and I have traveled the world together and seen just about everything that floats. And on one project, we found an armada of derelict ships that were chained together to form an ocean breakwater. The unusual thing is that the ships were made out of concrete. After all, it doesn't rust, and if you can make a bridge out of concrete, then there's no question that it's strong enough. And let's face it, at least ice floats. They really are like floating islands. Imagine if they were flat. They'd make great platforms to land and station aircraft from. Maybe there is genius in Geoffrey Pike's idea. Maybe there is more to Habakkuk than a gullible British authority that bought into a ludicrous idea put forward by an unstable eccentric.
James Delgado travels to England to investigate how Project Habakkuk came to be.
To learn how the remains of the top-secret Habakkuk project ended up at the bottom of a lake in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, I've come to London to see if I can understand how this seemingly crazy idea took root. Working out of these war rooms in the basement of the Treasury, Churchill set in motion an extraordinary chain of events that will lead us back to the Canadian Rockies and Project Habakkuk. In 1942, as a new prime minister fighting a losing war, Churchill made a bold and unconventional move. He appointed a dashing member of the royal family, Lord Louis Mountbatten, to Chief of Combined Operations, responsible for finding new ways to fight the Nazis.
The answer's easy, top of the class.
Mountbatten was a believer in science, and in England there was no better place for science than Cambridge University. At the Cavendish Lab in Cambridge, Mountbatten had met J.D. Bernal, a gifted physicist and former crystallography professor, who would serve as one of his scientific advisors. Cambridge had also been a home to the very brilliant Geoffrey Pike. A man with a head full of ideas, he was a character so eccentric and colorful, you would have a hard time inventing him if he didn't exist. As a young man in World War I, Pike snuck into Germany as a war correspondent. He was captured as a spy and then made a daring escape, coming home to great fame and acclaim. His next venture was the revolutionary Malting House School, which introduced the concept of progressive education to Britain. Without discipline or even a curriculum, it was like an educational Lord of the Flies. To pay for it all, Pike started buying metals on margin, using brokers all over town. At one point, he claimed to control a third of the world's supply of tin. When the bubble burst, in quick succession, he lost his fortune, his school, his family, and social status, and many say, his mental health. This was the same Geoffrey Pike who strode into Mountbatten's Combined Operations headquarters in February of 1942, exclaiming, "Lord Mountbatten, you need me on your staff. because I am a man who thinks. The very first brainwave Pike shared with Mountbatten would change warfare forever. The Germans had occupied Norway, and Pike's plan was to send in teams of snow-trained commandos parachuted behind enemy lines to perform sabotage. He was sent to Washington to help develop an ultralight joint Canadian and U.S. unit, the 1st Special Service Force, the Black Devils. Pike, the verbose, mad civilian who spoke like a biblical prophet, would lecture the Americans on the evils of capitalism. The Americans classified him as a security threat and soon stopped informing Pike of meetings, encouraging him to get some rest for his exhaustion at a mental hospital, which he did. His time in an American mental institution gave time for his thoughts of snow to turn to ice. Pike knew that icebergs, like the one that sank Titanic, were nearly invincible. Ice is plentiful, ice is unsinkable, ice is hard. The enemy will never suspect it. Ice will win the war. The concept of Habakkuk, a giant, invincible, unsinkable fighting island airbase of ice, was born. Pike had even envisioned improving on Mother Nature's ice, making it as strong as concrete and resistant to melting. Work started on Pike's theory on ice in an ultra top-secret frozen laboratory deep in the bowels of London's Smithfield Meat Market.
Mountbatten, on the advice of Burnell and Pike, recruited mineral chemistry and glaciology expert Max Perutz. The Cavendish Lab crystallographer would become their alchemist of ice.
During World War II, thanks to rationing, the market was closed, which made it the ideal location for a top-secret series of experiments by Max Perutz for Operation Habakkuk.
Pike had already consulted with the father of polymer science, Herman Mark of Brooklyn's Polytechnic Institute. Mark suggested introducing a fiber, such as wood pulp. Perutz immediately took his experiments in this new direction, and he too discovered that mixing ground wood pulp into the water made an ice that was as hard as concrete and resistant to melting.
This is where Perutz mixed the Pikecrete.
Mountbatten, disguised as a civilian, paid a visit to the secret deep freeze himself. Amazingly, Pike's original suggestion was absolutely right. They dropped the con from concrete and named it Pikecrete in Pike's honor. Mountbatten took some Pikecrete to Chequers, the Prime Minister's country estate. The two men watched and watched as the Pikecrete didn't melt. "I've long thirsted for the floating island," confided Winston Churchill in a staff memo. "The possibilities of Habakkuk are so dazzling that they do not at the moment need to be discussed. Grab an iceberg, renovate it, arm it, and then drag it to where it was needed. Ice could win the war."
The Brits needed help. They turned to Canada. For them, a mythic land of ice.
I've been paddling forever.
That looks like the spot right over there, right? Now that we know where the remains of Habakkuk had sunk, we have to come up with a more practical means than horseback to get to the dive site. We'll be meeting up with two men who actually helped build this ship of ice, but before they arrive, we want to have a look at Habakkuk for ourselves.
It really is.
For Jim and Susan, it will give a first-hand look at how well the structure has been holding up after being submerged for over 60 years in this cold mountain lake. It really is a most unusual artifact in a most unusual setting. And it's not often that we dive at altitude this far above sea level. The thinner atmosphere up here in the mountains poses some problems for us, which Warren, our safety coordinator, explains. While Warren's done the sort of the math.
Yeah, I understand the wreck is anywhere from, say, 15 or 20 meters all the way to about 30 meters, I guess, in depth. Unusual decompression stops. We shouldn't have too many stops. We should just have a safety stop really at 10 or 15 feet. as long as we keep a 20-minute plan, so we should be good.
Well, let's throw this gear off then.
Good. All right.
Thanks to the work of Susan Langley and her colleagues, a great deal was learned about the Habakkuk prototype in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. More than a decade later, these dives are intended to follow up on that work, to see how the site is changing over time. As they head north into the lake, Jim Delgado makes a startling discovery.
When we arrive at the wreck site, it is obvious that Habakkuk has deteriorated drastically. About 15 meters offshore, we see one giant wall, standing perfectly upright in the water. The other walls have all collapsed like a house of cards. At the base of the upright west wall is what looks like the intact floor, but we soon realize it must be the south wall, which has fallen inwards. As we move to the east, we see enormous amounts of asphalt oozing like lava, some scattered in large clumps, which we have no explanation for. We can only hope that the men we'll meet tomorrow, the men who actually built this, can shed some light on this mystery. As we move out toward the north, the bottom of the lake quickly falls away beneath us. The north wall, and who knows what else, has fallen and is mostly gone, vanished into the depths below. We find the refrigeration chamber, or what's left of it, easily identifiable by the circular holes cut into it. Only one wall of this once sturdy shack is still standing. It's been pushed to the very edge of the structure by gravity and by the collapse of the south wall. We move carefully around the vulnerable artifact. Any accidental contact with the fragile structure is sure to send pieces sliding down to the silty bottom of the lake, never to be seen again. From this vantage point, we can really see inside as Habakkuk exposes itself in its collapse. The interior components, the parts that previously could not be seen, are now being revealed due to the natural deterioration of the wreck. The fact that Habakkuk sits at a 45-degree angle is not helping it. Gravity is taking its toll, so Habakkuk is not going to last.
It isn't often you find divers who are accustomed to being deep under the ocean waves on a dive adventure this high in the Rocky Mountains. But this is exactly where Jim Delgado and I find ourselves in our search for the remains of Habakkuk.
We're 9,500 above sea level. And what's the temperature outside the chopper? Outside air temperature is at 0 degrees Celsius. Okay. And we're moving 120 miles an hour, yet it seems like it's barely going past. Yeah. Okay, I get it.
The British request of the Canadians in January of 1943 was simple and urgent. Can you build an invincible artificial iceberg to use as a floating landing strip? Can it be done? And could Canada deliver the first Habakkuk by next winter?
Hey, Mike, look at that.
This is another of those mad, wild schemes, wrote a skeptical Dean C.J. Mackenzie of the National Research Council in Ottawa. Having put his personal doubts aside, he attacked the problem on all fronts at once with his characteristic speed and efficiency. In Montreal, Ottawa, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Edmonton, and in the Banff and Jasper National Parks, they started top-secret research.
When I first heard about Pykrete and the claims that it was as strong as concrete and could be used to build a giant ship, I was skeptical. Much like the Canadian engineers and scientists must have thought back in '43, they've got to be crazy. I've decided to make some blocks of Pykrete for myself and perform my own tests, like they did back then. I use a formula they tested, which is 10% ground wood pulp from a local paper mill mixed into water. I make some regular ice as well. In a few days, it'll all be frozen solid, and we'll see for ourselves what Pykrete is all about.
In 1943, the centerpiece of the experiments, and the only thing that didn't melt away entirely, was a floating 1 to 50 scale model Habakkuk of ice. Jasper, Alberta, is chosen as the site for building the model Habakkuk. It is remote, cold, and has easy access to the rail lines that are needed to bring in supplies. Jasper Park Superintendent Major James Wood is ecstatic to finally be involved in the war effort and enthusiastically manages construction from the park office. He will build a model vessel, not of Pykrete, but of frozen lake ice, learning much that can be applied to constructing full-sized Habakkuks the following winter. By Valentine's Day, the cold weather has not come. They move higher up into the mountains to Patricia Lake, nestled under the imposing shadow of Pyramid Mountain, searching for every degree of coal they can find. They bring in power from town and start constructing the frame on top of the soft lake ice. Even at this altitude, the lake is melting to slush underneath them during the warm days. If cold weather doesn't arrive again soon, the project is doomed. Meanwhile, the Battle of the Atlantic rages on in U-Boat Alley, over 1,000 meters below and 6,000 kilometers away from Jasper, in the menacing hell of the Black Pit. In Britain's darkest hour, Churchill desperately needed his unsinkable giant islands of ice. By the end of February, the Ark had taken shape, built directly on top of the slushy lake ice. Teams of alternative service workers were pulled from the job of building the backcountry roads and bridges required in the park system. They labored without question on the mysterious ark of ice, never considering that this simple floating barn-like structure was part of a top-secret war project, a war that they had chosen not to fight. Today, a handful of these former workers are the only survivors connected firsthand to Operation Habakkuk.
We're too far, aren't we?
David Gertson and Henry Martins were both young men when they built the Ark.
We're just about at that spot where our camp was. Henry here recognized it because he chased a bear up the hill there.
Right up and behind those trees, there's a mean old bear up there once. He's always attacking our meat house.
The bear we had at the kitchen here was like our dog. It was around there all the time. Mama had her cubs there, and we chased the cubs, and no.
They were pretty tame.
We weren't scared of a bear here. I guess there's still a certain amount of mystery behind all this. Well, the lake was there. We were building here.
We used to call it Noah's Ark.
Yeah, that was Noah's Ark.
The first few days I worked on sawing wood, and then I was put on to building a house out of tar, and we were going to put ice blocks into it. And I wonder, what on earth is this all about?
Oh, I wasn't told anything. They just sent me a ticket.
Really, we didn't think of the details. We just built the house. Didn't make sense to us.
It took only a week to construct the wooden frame, and another 3 weeks to make and pour the homemade asphalt and seal the leaky pipes with tar. Finally, the long-awaited cold weather arrived, allowing them to fill the interior of the Ark with layers of ice blocks carefully cut from the lake. Uniformed RCMP officers guard the location around the clock from any German spies or wayward skiers. Already their Habakkuk is too heavy, and it bends the lake ice out of shape as part of it sinks down, warping and cracking the floor. They decide to cut the Ark free, hoping that it will float like a ship it is meant to be, and not sink like the asphalt barn that it resembles. If she is not watertight, weeks of work will prematurely sink directly to the bottom of Patricia Lake. Dean C.J. Mackenzie, acting president of the National Research Council of Canada, prepares for the arrival of Geoffrey Pike and fellow eccentric J.D. Bernal. The three will assess the success or failure of the various Habakkuk and Pykrete research projects underway across the country, including here at Patricia Lake. In March of 1943, 108 ships were lost in the Atlantic to the approximately 100 U-boats hunting at sea at any one time. It was the third deadliest month of the entire war for Allied shipping. That fact may explain why Mr. Churchill sent the following telegram to the Prime Minister of Canada, Mackenzie King.
I am very much interested in this project called Habakkuk, and am most anxious to have your vehement support. The Chief of Combined Operations is arranging to send Mr. Pike and Professor Bernal to you to tell the whole story. This is for you alone, as the utmost secrecy is indispensable.
Upon arriving in Canada, Pike and Bernal were to be escorted by their host, Dean C.J. Mackenzie, on a train tour out west to inspect the various research projects ahead of the April 1st deadline. The Canadians have clearly learned more about ice than was ever known before, and most surprisingly, the test results for Pykrete, frozen wood pulp mixed with water, is testing off the scale for strength. How will Mike Fletcher's Pykrete mixture measure
Excuse
up?
me, are you Rick?
Yes, I am.
I'm Mike.
Hi, Mike. Pleased to meet you.
I'm here to smash some Pykrete.
Mike meets with Rick Dunn at the Bull Meadow Rifle Range
So, there we
to
go.
perform his own battery of tests.
So ice first.
Ice first.
Whoa! It disappeared.
It's gone.
So, is that what we're going to do the Pykrete now?
That's we'll do the Pykrete, see the test result.
I have to admit, I'm impressed.
What a difference.
How incredibly strong Pykrete is. Now that didn't do nearly as much. And how simple it is to make. As it melts, the outer layer softens and creates its own insulation,
Be lucky you break
keeping the
that.
rest of it frozen.
No, it's not going to go easily. Might have to shoot it with the shotgun to get it apart.
I'm starting to think there may actually be something about this crazy scheme of building a ship, not of ice, but of Pykrete.
The trio of Mackenzie, Pike, and Bernal traveled by train to Jasper. And to everyone's great relief, including laborers David and Henry, the Habakkuk model was floating proud and straight.
Certainly I remember seeing Pike.
Coming once, and there was three of them all together. And they were talking, and I was watching from a distance.
Dean Mackenzie is initially impressed, but then, as his personal diary reveals, quickly annoyed by the queer-looking team and their antics.
I didn't know what they're talking about.
He is a most unusual type, and most people think he's absolutely mad.
To me, he didn't look like an engineer.
Oh, he didn't look like nothing.
But I suppose he had the brains.
Traveling with Pike is like traveling with a small child, and and he finally turns up at the last moment when all was about to be lost.
He was just kind of an oddball around there.
He went skiing in the most grotesque outfits, with his muffler and raincoat and a pair of spats.
Somehow it seems to me he had kind of a funny hat on.
On the way to Winnipeg, he lost his ticket.
We sure thought it was odd, all right?
Well, of course, we don't dress properly either, so.
He just goes through his pockets and the most unusual number of things come out.
Yeah, there was a little bit, shall we say, humorous talk about him.
We subsequently found that in spite of his grotesque attire, he was an excellent mountaineer.
Despite Mackenzie's exasperation, he was impressed with the results of the tests. Pike and Bernal flew back to Ottawa and met with Canadian Prime Minister Mackenzie King.
Had a long and very interesting conversation with Dr. Pike and Mr. Bernal about the Habakkuk project.
Mackenzie King either didn't notice, or was too polite to note, that a broken zipper had kept Jeffrey Pike's trouser fly wide open for the duration of their meeting.
I feel the project is far from fanciful, likely to be a real service, pretty expensive and costly experimentation.
$1 million was allotted from the Canadian budget to continue work on Habakkuk, and the Montreal Engineering Company started to design and prepare to build a full-sized vessel, Habakkuk II.
How do you do?
Hello. How do you do?
The success of the experiment
You're the diver.
was due in large part to laborers who built the Habakkuk prototype.
You don't want me to dive.
Got it. Good to meet you.
Men such as Henry Martins and David Gertson,
And that fellow paddling up is Mike Fletcher.
who have come to meet the dive team.
And you had no idea what you were building?
No idea at all.
Nobody used the word Habakkuk?
No.
No.
The only place we read about it was in the Bible.
Yeah?
Yeah.
In March 1943, there was one other place they could have read about a giant warship of ice floating in the Atlantic. A story of a Nazi floating fortress disguised as a fiendishly clever iceberg ran in the Superman newspaper comic strip. A story so fantastical, the workers could never have imagined that they were actually building a prototype of just such a vessel. With the aid of modern technology, Henry Martins and David Gertson will see with their own eyes the fate of the object they had labored so intensely on many years ago on this frozen winter lake.
So, gentlemen, for the first time in 60 years, unless you took a swim, did you ever think you'd be seeing this again?
Never.
Never give it a thought.
Brings back memories.
And here we are coming up right on the wreck. And this is a section of wall that's fallen down. That's some of that tar right here.
Yes, that's it. Globs of it. Yeah, we called it Noah's Ark.
What were your roles in building this?
My role was in putting tar into the walls, driving it up with a wheelbarrow and carrying it in buckets. The tar would dry on your gloves, and so the gloves would stick to the pail, they'd stick to the wheelbarrow, so we left the gloves there. Pulled our hands out, next time we were ready to go, just put your hands in the gloves and away you went.
So we're still clinging to the handles of the wheel.
Oh, yes.
How about you, David?
I was never on that tar job that way. We were cutting ice, a long strip of ice, and then every 4 feet we would cut across. Two guys would pull that out of the ice right onto the truck. Now you can imagine the weight of that thing, 4 feet by 2 feet. That's quite a chunk of ice.
Now what he's doing is he's looking down the slope, and this is all the loose boards and things that have slid off.
Oh, I see. Looks like plywood, eh? And then they got holes cut into that for the pipe to come.
Here's the wall again, and there's the joists.
I remember the higher the walls got, then the plank where you drive the wheelbarrows up got steeper. So we'd have to take a good run at it from the bottom to get to the top. That's one wheelbarrow I dumped over. It blew up in my face in the tank, the fumes. So I lost a bit of skin on that one. But it healed up nice.
But on the whole, there were no serious accidents. That's about the worst that would have happened.
You're conscientious objectors. Your faith says you can't aid the war effort. And here you are building this thing. You obviously didn't know that this was for the war.
Absolutely not. We've been fooled by our government. When you look at governments, when you look at wars and stuff like that, it doesn't really matter if there's a few lies creep in, as long as we get this objective or whatever we want to do. Looking back in hindsight, what should we have done?
We had only known.
So for you, Habakkuk meant is a book in the Bible.
They didn't name it in those days.
And that word never got used when you guys were out here working, I guess.
No, why they named it Habakkuk, they just took that part of that one verse out of the book of Habakkuk. The verse they were using there was that this was the most spectacular, I forget the exact wording, but this was going to be something great. Interesting part about this whole thing that we should be in history books. No, this is wood.
In April of 1943, work on the top secret prototype for the ship of ice was complete. It will float on Patricia Lake throughout the long summer, disguised as a boathouse. A final test for its ability to remain frozen and to remain secret. In Montreal, plans were progressing to build a giant 600-meter-long Habakkuk II, weighing 2 million tons. It would be 26 times the displacement of the Queen Elizabeth, have a crew of thousands, and be a base for hundreds of planes. Potentially, it would be the largest project ever undertaken in Canada. Schedules, budgets, and blueprints were drawn up for a Pykrete factory in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. It was one of only 2 locations in Canada that could prove suitable and could swell with 35,000 Habakkuk workers, if they could be found. The project would necessitate the construction of a massive cofferdam, pumping Corner Brook Harbor dry. The cost is estimated at over 100 million Canadian dollars. At this major junction in the project, it was time for Mackenzie, Pike, and Bernal to present a summation to Churchill. In May, the Canadians made the journey across the Atlantic without incident. For as fast as they had built the Habakkuk model, events in the Atlantic had changed even faster. Convoys were now crossing without a single loss, and the Battle of the Atlantic was all but over. By all accounts, Dean C.J. Mackenzie was a practical and level-headed man. And while building the Habakkuk may have been a possibility, it certainly wasn't strategically feasible, considering the greatest need for it had passed. That was the message he was here in London to deliver in absolutely top-level meetings. Privately, some of the high-level personnel complimented Mackenzie on speaking the first sense they had heard on the subject. It was a great day for Dean Mackenzie. Pike and Bernal, however, refused to accept his conclusions, insisting that everything would be hunky-dory if only he weren't so cautious and, well, Canadian. Mackenzie uncharacteristically blew off. In his diary, he wrote that Pike kept grinning like an imbecile, and Mountbatten was royal prince with 2 mad advisors. Mackenzie threatened to withdraw entirely unless he was allowed to present his negative but more realistic report to Winston Churchill, who would soon be returning from a war conference in Washington. At 10 Downing Street, Mackenzie delivered the bad news. Habakkuk would cost a fortune, require too many men and resources, and they hadn't yet solved all the design and engineering issues. After a long silence, Churchill was visibly annoyed. He didn't care about construction problems. Why couldn't they just find a lozenge of ice in the Arctic to use? That day, Churchill was a persuasive dictator who did not take objections kindly. He wanted his floating islands for an invasion of Europe. Canceling Habakkuk was out of the question. The meeting was adjourned. Despite Dean Mackenzie's best efforts, Operation Habakkuk did not die that day. Work would continue on the full-sized invincible Pykrete Habakkuk, and the prototype remained floating, frozen solid on Patricia Lake.
I'm wondering if maybe there isn't a big piece of the refrigeration unit that's tumbled all the way down, you know?
Well, that's what we're doing the dive for, right?
Yeah.
That's at the bottom of the cliff.
Well, like the refrigeration unit's gone.
As the sun falls behind the Rocky Mountains, Mike and Warren prepare for a descent of their own. One last dive on the Habakkuk model.
Warren,
yeah,
130 feet of water, basically.
Well, that'll be our max depth. But basically, we're treating our decompression like it's a 160-foot dive. You have to add 30 feet to the depth.
Mm-hmm. For safety, we decide to make a night dive, giving time to normalize our blood chemistry before flying.
Slate rather than the bottom timers.
Well, I'm all set. Everything looks good for me.
Yeah, I'm real close.
We may be losing some sleep, but the world underwater at night holds a promise of a far more interesting dive when the only light source is carried on your camera. I'm struck by the contrast between the extreme quiet and stillness up here in this remote mountain lake, a place where time really stands still, compared with the terrifying destruction, the devastation that would have been taking place at any moment on the Atlantic during the U-boat attacks. We slowly make our way down through the clear, fresh water over the tangled remains of Habakkuk. Habakkuk was a weapon of war, built by men of peace. A weapon that would have surprised the enemy not with its speed, but with its size and its permanence. The lake is slowly reclaiming Habakkuk. It will eventually swallow the Ark entirely as it continues its slide down the deep underwater cliff it now clings to. Our hopes of finding some smaller object deeper down the cliff face are dashed when we encounter a bottom covered in fine powdery silt. It obscures everything when it's disturbed and one day will entirely engulf Habakkuk. Ironically, shortly after the war, an enormous floating island of ice was discovered in the Arctic, named T3, or get this, Fletcher's Ice Island. It floated through the Arctic and was turned into an airbase and weather research station, almost as Churchill had originally envisioned. It eventually escaped into the Atlantic, where it soon melted. We make a slow ascent, doing our decompression stops along the way. When we reached the surface, still in the darkness of night, I couldn't stop thinking about the magnitude of what they had tried to achieve. I wondered how different things might be if they had actually built Habakkuk, how much better this story and this wreckage would be known.
Whole different dive at night.
Yeah, it really is.
Notice how soft the silt was though?
How does it feel to be seeing this, guys?
Oh, terrific. Brings back memories.
Most dives I go on, I'm dealing with ships where the people involved are all gone. As an archaeologist, meeting people like Henry and David, who worked firsthand on something as historic as Habakkuk, makes the story come alive for me. It reminds me that it's not just the giants like Churchill who make up history. It's people like Henry and David that really bring history and archaeology to life. A history that otherwise would be lost to oblivion in the glacial time of the Rockies. In August of 1943, the Allied leaders gathered in Quebec City to plot the war. High on the agenda was Operation Habakkuk. Churchill and the Canadians wanted the very reluctant Americans involved. To break the tension, Mountbatten presented blocks of ice and pikeweed shipped from Montreal. He sent the junior officers out of the room and pulled out his revolver. When the gunshots stopped, the ice had been shattered, but the bullet shot at the pikeweed had ricocheted, narrowly missing an American general. In the hall outside, the junior officers were convinced that the meeting had degenerated into a shooting match. The Americans now controlled Operation Habakkuk. They had only one condition, that Jeffrey Pike would have nothing more to do with it. Pike's earlier work with the Americans had made a lasting impression, and he was cut out from his own project. Mountbatten was looking for a new challenge, and he found it in his appointment to head of the Asian Command. In one day, Pike had been shut out of his own project and had lost his biggest backer at Combined Ops. It was a bad day for Jeffrey Pike. Churchill finally got his floating islands. The Mulberry Harbors, so vital to the success of the Normandy invasion and ultimate victory in the war, owed much to J.D. Burnell. Maybe Churchill was right not to kill Habakkuk after all. In January of 1944, almost a year after the model was built on Patricia Lake, the Americans had learned all they needed, and Operation Habakkuk was quietly killed. In Quebec, the British agreed to halt their atomic research and send all their nuclear physicists to work on the Manhattan Project, including many from the Cavendish lab around the corner from here at the famous Eagle Pub. Along with Mackenzie's men from Canada's NRC, they would eventually finish Habakkuk's intellectual sister project, the atomic bomb, whose devastating fire would easily trump a mere ship of ice and put a close to the war in the Pacific, rendering the Habakkuk prototype obsolete before its time. After Quebec, Dean Mackenzie ordered the Habakkuk prototype to be stripped of anything reusable and the freezers unplugged. It floated for the rest of the fall without a roof, eventually sinking, settling into its precarious perch at the bottom of Patricia Lake. After the war, the more Pike studied the world, the more hopeless and pessimistic he became. One winter evening in 1948, he shaved off his beard, swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills, and said goodbye to an unappreciative world. However, on Pike's death, the London Times described him as one of the most original, if unrecognized figures of the present century.
And now it's your turn to go into the mountains, go into the deserts, go into the lakes, the rivers, and the seas, and search for history. You'll never have a more rewarding adventure.
Join us again as we search the oceans of the world for lost and famous shipwrecks. Another true adventure with the Sea Hunters.